Welcome as we continue our study of Colossians chapter 3, verse 19. Husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter against them. So uh, recall that we've transitioned into a section where Paul's addressing our relationships with other people. In this section, he's focused on husband and wife, but he's about to move into children and parents. And so he gives a command here for husbands to love their wives, just as he gave the command in 18 for wives to be subjected to their own husbands. Love is agapeo, and its root there is agape. We've seen that before. Just be reminded that's a needs. It's a cognitive based love, so it's to assess the needs of another person and try to meet those needs. So, as a husband, it's my job to assess my wife's needs. Does she, whether she needs something as far as physical, spiritual, emotional, mental, um, all of those are things that uh, as I love her, it's my responsibility to try and help her in those areas, to help her in her needs in those areas, no matter what consequence it has to me. If she's exhausted and needs a night off from the kids, it's my job to pick up the slack and take care of the kids, whatever that means, right? So, um, keep in mind that this is just one of the many roles that the husband has. Ephesians 5 talks specifically about the relationship between a husband and a wife and how it's meant to embody the relationship between Christ and the church. And so Christ is looking at you as a husband as basically as himself in the marriage. And so he gives you some specific tasks to do there, to be the head of your wife as he is the head of the church, to love her as he loves the church. And so it's my job as a husband to sanctify my wife in the word, pray for her, to intercede for her, to lead her, provide for her. And these are all things that you find in scripture. And so when it tells you to love your wives, it's talking about all of those things, right? And you're really taking on the role of leadership as your teacher, and James says that in 3:1 that while the role of being a teacher is definitely a great thing, that you should be careful in taking it on, because as a teacher you will be judged greater, maybe you could say judged more harshly, but your deeds will be judged, in other words. And so whether you knew you were taking on that role when you got married or not is irrelevant. In God's eyes, when you got married, those are the roles you took on. You volunteered to take them on. And so it's your job to know what those roles are. It's your job to study scripture so you understand those roles. And it's your job to fulfill those roles in your marriage. And He's going to hold you accountable to that. The next part is not being bitter against your wife. So, bitter here is Prakanyo, and ultimately that comes, you got to go a few levels down. But precose, and there's actually further, you could derive this further, but precose is probably gives you enough to really understand. So precose is talking about fruit actually on the vine being bitter or being acrid, which would indicate it's actually poisonous. So when it's saying to not embitter your wife, it's really saying don't poison her against you. So when you talk to her harshly, when you mislead her, when I say mislead, I mean lead her in a poor way, lead her in a way that's not doesn't line up with Scripture. When you try to make her do things that don't line up with Scripture, and when you force her to do anything, really, like you should always be gentle in your leadership and always lead in a way that lines up with Scripture, and you should always be weighing your leadership uh, against Scripture to make sure that you are doing that. And if you're not doing that, then you are likely to embitter her, to poison her against you, and that's not good for her or you, or your marriage, or your kids if you have kids, because they get to see that. So be wise as a husband, and definitely again love her and meet her needs.